The courthouse after hours is a cathedral of echoes. Over the years, I've learned to love this specific brand of quiet, the stale scent of old paper, the rhythmic flicker of the fluorescent lights, the way the silence seems to sharpen my every thought. I was standing outside Courtroom B, obsessively flipping through my defense notes for the third time, when I realized I'd left my coffee upstairs. I turned toward the stairwell, my heels clicking a steady, mocking rhythm against the marble. In my head, I was already rehearsing my closing argument. The case felt impossible, everyone had told me so. I was defending a young man charged with aggravated assault based on nothing but circumstantial evidence. The prosecution had the momentum, they had public sympathy, and they had Tom. Tom Reeves. My former lover. My current rival. I paused just outside the stairwell door when I heard his voice drifting through the gap. "She doesn't even realize how predictable she is," Tom said. He let out a soft laugh, a sound that used to make me feel warm, but now made my skin crawl. I froze. Jessica's voice followed his, hushed but thick with amusement. "Her notes are gold. She color codes everything. All I had to do was stay late one night and copy them," Tom finished. "I know. You did beautifully." My pulse thundered in my ears, a deafening drumbeat that made the world tilt. "I almost felt bad," Jessica giggled. "She trusted me." "She always trusted the wrong people," Tom snorted. The stairwell door felt impossibly heavy under my hand, as if it weighed more than steel, as if opening it would finalize the destruction of every illusion I had left about my life. "She thinks she's winning this one," Jessica continued. "That alternative theory she's building? Already dismantled. I used her own outline to prep the rebuttal." Tom chuckled. "It's almost poetic, isn't it? Beating her with her own mind." I leaned my forehead against the cold wall. They weren't just betraying my profession. They were harvesting my thoughts, my instincts. Every sleepless hour of strategy I'd poured into this case was being used as a weapon against me. I pushed the door open. The hinges groaned. Tom and Jessica snapped apart like startled teenagers caught in a lie. "Ivy," Tom started. I looked at him as if I'd never seen him before in my life. "So that's how you're winning," I said. My voice was quiet, terrifyingly steady. Jessica went deathly pale. I can explain." "Don't," I said. "Just don't." Tom took a step toward me, his charming mask slipping back into place. "This is not what it sounds like, Ivy." "It's exactly what it sounds like," I replied. "You're stealing privileged defense material through my own paralegal." Jessica burst into tears. "I needed the money." He said it was harmless. Tom rounded on her instantly. "Don't make this my fault." I laughed, a sharp, jagged sound stripped of any humor. "Of course. Nothing is ever your fault, is it, Tom?" The silence that followed was raw and exposed. "You built your case on me," I said, meeting his eyes. "On what I give freely to the people I trust." Tom clenched his jaw, his eyes darkening. "You don't have proof." "I don't need it," I told him. "I just need to change everything." I turned and walked away. My heels were steady on the marble, my heart burning, not broken, but forged into something harder. I no longer needed the coffee. I needed war. I slammed my office door behind me, the sound echoing through the empty hallway, and leaned back against the wood. I let the silence wash over me, trying to let it drown out the voices in the stairwell. The betrayal was still a raw, jagged edge in my chest. Tom, my ex, the man I'd shared a life with, and Jessica, the woman I had mentored. They hadn't just stolen my work, they had tried to steal my mind. But as I stood there in the dark, the heat of the anger didn't burn me out. It crystallized. It sharpened. I sat at my desk and spread the case files out under the lamp. I traced my fingers over the colored tabs and meticulous annotations. Tom thought these were the keys to his victory. He thought he knew exactly how I moved. I realized then, I had been giving him the map to my own destruction. So I decided to change the terrain. The long night. The phone rang. I didn't even look at it. I didn't need voices. I needed strategy. I opened my laptop and began to dismantle everything. Every argument I'd built over the last 3 months? Deleted. Every predictable move Tom was counting on? Inverted. I worked until the lines between night and morning blurred. Every loophole they thought they could exploit, I turned into a snare. Every piece of evidence they thought they had dismantled, I reframed into a question they weren't prepared to answer. When Claire, my assistant, poked her head in, her eyes were wide with worry. "Ivy, it's late. You should get some sleep." I didn't even look up from the screen. Sleep is for people who aren't about to turn the world upside down. She smiled faintly, though she looked concerned, and slipped away. I stayed. I rearranged timelines, rewrote testimony sequences, and found new angles that felt like lightning in my hands. I wasn't just being thorough anymore. I was becoming unpredictable. The reckoning. The next day in court, I felt like I was made of ice. I started subtly. I questioned witnesses with casual, almost breezy inquiries that seemed harmless, until they revealed inconsistencies that made the prosecution's case look like Swiss cheese. I watched Tom's face. His confident, smug smirk didn't just fade. It curdled. The first time a juror leaned forward, eyes narrowing as I exposed a critical flaw in his narrative, I knew I had him. Objection. Tom barked, his voice higher than usual. Overruled. The judge said, not even looking away from me. My pulse didn't even quicken. I let the momentum carry me. This wasn't just a defense anymore. It was an exposé. I was showing the court and Tom exactly what happens when you try to build a house on stolen ground. During the recess, I caught his eye across the room. His jaw was so tight, I thought it might crack. He was whispering frantically to Jessica, his face flushed with a panic I had never seen before. He had lost the lead. He had lost control. I smiled. Just a small, private flicker of one. Control belonged to me now. The message. By the end of the day, I hadn't just pivoted. I had rewritten the entire trial. The hopeless case was suddenly a live wire. My client went from a sacrificial lamb to a man with a very plausible chance at freedom. As I reviewed the transcripts that evening, I realized I was sending a message that went far beyond this courtroom. Betrayal might hurt, but intellect and resolve are unstoppable. A name flickered in the back of my mind, Roman. He's the opposing counsel I've faced before, the one who actually values competence. He would be watching this. He would see that I am not anyone's pawn. I wanted his respect, but more than that, I wanted the world to know that Ivy Hart doesn't break. She forges. I closed my laptop and took a deep breath of the quiet office air. The storm wasn't over, but I had already stepped into the center of it. And this time, I was the one holding the lightning. My office smelled of old leather and strong coffee, a scent I've come to associate with my best breakthroughs and my longest nights. The fire ignited by that betrayal in the stairwell hadn't died down. It had simply settled into a low, blue-hot glow of pure strategy. I leaned over my desk, scanning Tom's previous filings and the notes Jessica had left behind. Every argument they'd built, every insight they'd scavenged from my folders, left a trail of flaws only I could see. They hadn't realized that my brilliance didn't live in the notes. It lived in my ability to interpret them. They had the map, but I was the one who knew where the landmines were buried. A soft knock at the door broke my focus. "Ivy? Everything okay?" Claire's voice was hesitant, matching the cautious way she peeked into the room. "Yes," I said, my fingers never leaving the keyboard. "I'm more than okay, Claire. I'm about to win." She moved closer, glancing at the lines of text on my screen. This is bold. Even for you." I looked up, my eyes narrowing. Bold is the only language people like Tom and Jessica understand. They've spent months underestimating me. That is exactly why I have the advantage. The courtroom, a different game. The next morning, I entered the courtroom with my notes arranged like a deck of cards I'd already marked. I kept a composed, neutral smile on my face, but I could feel the tension in the room. The jury was restless, shifting in their seats. Tom was already there, pacing near the prosecution's table. He tried to look confident, but I saw the subtle scowl and the way he checked his watch every 30 seconds. He was anxious. Jessica stood nearby, her usual perkiness replaced by a forced, brittle expression. I began my work. I dismantled the prosecution's opening arguments with a surgical, measured tongue. I didn't need to shout or perform. I used the facts like a scalpel, letting the evidence speak louder than any theatrics. Then I moved in for the kill. Your Honor, I said, turning toward the bench, I'd like to introduce a series of documents previously omitted from the prosecution's files. They highlight significant discrepancies in witness testimonies and the handling of key evidence. Tom's head snapped up. Objection, he barked, his voice cracking slightly. Grounds, the judge asked. These were newly discovered materials, I replied smoothly, masking the surge of satisfaction in my chest. Provided to me by parties independent of the prosecution. The judge studied me for a long beat, then nodded. Admissible. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. I could feel the panic radiating off Tom in waves. He had counted on my predictability. He thought I'd follow the pattern he'd stolen from my desk. Instead, I had shattered the floor beneath him. The fracture. Hour by hour, I methodically tore his case apart. I led witnesses into inconsistencies they couldn't escape and highlighted evidence that had been misrepresented. I didn't accuse Tom of anything directly, not yet. I let the jury see the holes for themselves. Subtlety, I've learned, is far more lethal than outrage. During the afternoon recess, Tom cornered me in the hallway. His voice was low, urgent, and thick with frustration. Ivy, what is this? You're twisting everything I thought we knew about this case. I met his gaze with a steady, unblinking stare. No, Tom. I'm revealing what's always been true. The truth doesn't need twisting. He flushed, his fists clenching at his sides. You don't understand the risk you're taking. I understand perfectly, I snapped, cutting him off. The risk was never mine. It was yours the moment you decided to cheat. The commander of the storm. By the time the sun began to set, I had turned a hopeless case into a battlefield where I held every high ground. I walked back to my office exhausted, but it was the kind of exhaustion that felt like a victory lap. Tom's arrogance and Jessica's greed had created the very cracks I needed. I sat at my desk and allowed myself a single, small smile. I knew Roman would be watching. He's the only one in this building who truly appreciates the precision of a well-executed pivot. Soon, I wouldn't just be another name on a case file or an ex-girlfriend to be managed. I would be a force that no one could ignore. The storm wasn't over. But for the first time in weeks, I wasn't just surviving it. I was commanding it. The courtroom buzzed around me with a low hum, that specific kind of static that vibrates in the air just before a storm breaks. I walked to my table with a measured, steady pace. My briefcase was heavy, not just with the strategy I'd spent the last 48 hours recalibrating, but with a newfound sense of purpose. I saw Tom before I even sat down. He was flustered, his fingers fumbling with a stack of papers that clearly no longer felt like an advantage to him. Jessica lingered just behind his shoulder, her eyes darting toward me with a nauseating mix of guilt and raw fear. I let my lips curve into a subtle, almost imperceptible smile. They had no idea what was coming. The precision strike. I started by calling a key witness, a lab technician whose prior testimony had seemed like a routine win for the prosecution. I approached the stand with a quiet authority, keeping my tone soft, almost conversational. But there was steel beneath every word. Please describe your handling of the evidence in question, I said, my eyes locked on theirs. The technician's hands shook slightly as they adjusted the microphone. I documented everything according to standard protocol. They flicked a glance toward Tom. Searching for a lead. Searching for safety. Everything. I pressed, slowly flipping through my notes. Including the chain of custody for the blood samples collected at the scene? Yes, but some files were misplaced, the witness admitted. A murmur swept through the room. I could feel the ripple of doubt hitting the jury box. Every small admission was a chink in the prosecution's armor, and I let the pause linger just long enough to give it weight. Objection. Leading the witness. Tom barked. His voice was too sharp, too desperate. I looked at the judge, my expression a mask of professional calm. Your Honor, I am clarifying details directly related to the integrity of the evidence. The relevance is critical to the defense. Sustained, the judge said, nodding at me. Proceed, Ms. Hart. The document Tom buried. I took a deep breath and reached for the killing blow, a document Tom thought he had successfully destroyed. I held it up, making sure the jury saw the official seal before I even spoke. This internal memo contradicts the statements presented yesterday, I said, my voice rising just enough to command the silence. The prosecution misrepresented the facts. Jessica's face went pasty. She started fidgeting, looking at Tom for a reassurance he was no longer capable of giving. I turned to the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, my client's life is being weighed based on manipulated evidence and stolen strategies. The integrity of this court depends on the truth, not the convenience of winning at any cost. By the afternoon, the momentum was a physical force. I watched the jurors leaning forward, whispering, their skepticism now aimed squarely at the prosecution's table. Tom's earlier confidence hadn't just eroded, it had collapsed into visible panic. An unexpected ally. During the recess, I stayed at my table. I didn't want coffee. I wanted to keep my head in the game. I was reviewing the next phase when a shadow fell over my papers. It was Roman. You've done the impossible, he said softly. I didn't look up at first, but I could hear the genuine respect in his voice. I've never seen someone turn a case this hopeless into something almost untouchable. I looked up then and offered a faint smile. Almost, Roman. But I'm not finished yet. He nodded, a look of recognition in his eyes. If anyone deserves this win, Ivy, it's you. And if it matters, you're not alone out there. His words hit me in a way I hadn't expected. It wasn't the condescending support Tom used to offer to keep me compliant. This was a peer recognizing a powerhouse. It was the first time I felt like someone saw my brilliance without trying to own it. The final hammer blow. Back in the room, I didn't let up. My final cross-examinations were a masterclass in dismantling a lie. I exposed the depth of Tom's malpractice, the inconsistencies, the reliance on my own stolen notes, the coaching from Jessica. Every revelation landed like a hammer blow. By the time the day ended, the hopeless trial had become a massacre. Tom sat in silence, his ego bruised and his confidence shattered. Jessica wouldn't even lift her head. I gathered my papers, clicked my briefcase shut, and stood tall. I wasn't just a defense attorney anymore. I was a force of nature. Roman's words echoed in my mind. You're not alone. For the first time since I stood in that dark stairwell, I felt more than just vindicated. I felt unstoppable. I walked into the courtroom that morning with a sense of quiet determination that felt like armor. This was the moment everything changed. The air in the room was thick, charged with the realization that the tide hadn't just turned, it had become a tsunami. I glanced at my client. For the first time, he was sitting upright in the defense box, his eyes wide with a cautious, fragile optimism. Then I looked at the jury. I could see the change in their faces. The curiosity had been replaced by a deep, focused engagement. They knew they were watching something extraordinary. The final strike. Tom sat rigidly at the prosecution table, his hands clenching and unclenching around his notes. I watched as the paper crumpled under his white-knuckled grip. He was trying to hold on to his composure, but the cracks were everywhere. Behind him, Jessica was a ghost of her former self, her smug confidence replaced by frantic, nervous glances at the jury. I began with the final piece of my strategy, a sequence of evidence Tom had dismissed as inconsequential. I moved through the emails, the internal memos, and the witness statements with surgical precision. Each document I presented was a reminder that I wasn't just fighting for a not guilty verdict, I was exposing the rod of deception and betrayal. Your Honor, I said, my voice filling the silent room with calm authority, the prosecution has failed not because of oversight, but because of a deliberate, unethical reliance on materials stolen from the defense. This is no longer just a matter of legal procedure, it is a matter of justice. Objection. Tom's voice was a jagged edge. I turned to him, my eyes locked on his. Objection noted. I said, before the judge could even speak. But the evidence speaks for itself. The integrity of this trial depends on the truth, not on what is convenient for the prosecution. The judge nodded gravely. Proceed, Ms. Hart. The weight of truth. Every word I spoke felt like I was chipping away at the foundation Tom had built. I watched the jurors leaning forward, some nodding subtly, others scribbling notes. The tension in the room was palpable, coiling tighter and tighter until I reached my conclusion. I allowed a brief, heavy pause to settle over the room. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I said softly, my client deserves justice. And justice is only served when those who manipulate the system are held accountable. A profound hush fell over the court. Tom's smugness had finally evaporated into a cold, hard silence. He leaned back, his jaw tight, staring at the floor. Jessica pressed her lips together, her eyes reflecting a sudden, sharp regret. The verdict. Hours later, the jury returned. My heart beat with a steady rhythm. Not with the frantic pulse of fear, but with the certainty of a job done right. I had anticipated every countermove. I had turned their betrayal into my greatest power. The foreperson stood. We find the defendant not guilty. A surge of relief swept through the room like a physical wave. My client exhaled a breath he seemed to have been holding for months, tears welling in his eyes. I felt a tightening in my own chest, a pure, clean triumph born of resilience and strategy. A new beginning. As I packed my briefcase, the courtroom emptying around me, a shadow fell over my desk. It was Roman. You did it, he said, his voice low and rich with a mixture of admiration and relief. You didn't just win a case, Ivy. You exposed the truth. You made them accountable. I brushed a stray hair back from my face and offered him a small smile. It's taken me a long time to realize that justice doesn't come from fury. It comes from clarity and having the courage to act on it. Roman hesitated, his gaze softening. I've watched you through this entire trial. You're brilliant, relentless, and you've been unfairly underestimated. But not anymore. I looked at him, and for the first time, I felt a spark of genuine trust. Thank you, Roman. Your respect means more than you realize. I walked out of that courthouse feeling a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. I had reclaimed my power. I had won the impossible. And as I looked toward the future, I knew that betrayal would never dictate my path again. I had chosen myself, and I had become unstoppable. The courthouse was quieter now, the echoes of the trial lingering like a faint shadow in the marble hallways. I didn't stay for the victory speeches or the scattered applause in the lobby. I had learned through fire that real triumph is quieter, sharper, and far more satisfying when it's earned on your own terms. My phone hadn't stopped buzzing with messages, reporters, colleagues, and even rival attorneys who had once looked right through me. Every headline praised my brilliant strategic pivot and my courtroom mastery. But the messages that actually made me smile were the ones I didn't expect. Partnership inquiries from top-tier firms, high-stakes clients asking for my representation, and a simple note from Roman. Well done. We need to talk. The dust settles. I spent the morning watching the wreckage of the prosecution's side from a distance. Tom's reputation, already fragile after my cross-examinations, was in tatters. The legal board had begun a quiet investigation into his ethical violations, and Jessica had been suspended pending a full review. I didn't feel a twisted sense of glee in their ruin. I felt relief. The people who had betrayed me were finally facing the consequences of their own choices. I hadn't had to strike them down. I had simply held up a mirror to the truth and let them destroy themselves. A different kind of support. Midday, Roman walked into my office. He didn't announce himself. He just appeared, carrying 2 coffee cups and that familiar, measured confidence that always seemed to steady the room. You need this, he said, setting a cup on my desk. After yesterday, you more than earned it. I looked up at him, a faint smile playing on my lips. I think I earned more than just coffee, Roman. You earned respect, Ivy, he said, leaning casually against the edge of my desk. Respect from your peers, the jury, and even from your enemies, though they'll hate admitting it. I laughed softly, hearing the genuine admiration in his voice. It was a refreshing change from the condescension I'd lived with for years. It feels different. To win without bending. Without compromising who I am. That's because you didn't just fight the case, Roman said, his eyes locking onto mine with an intense clarity. You fought for yourself. His words struck a chord I hadn't realized was vibrating. He was right. The stairwell betrayal, the sleepless nights, the total dismantling of my original strategy, it hadn't just been about a not guilty verdict. It was about reclaiming my life, my integrity, and the confidence they tried to steal. I hadn't just won a trial. I had proven my own resilience to the only person who needed to see it, me. The partnership. The conversation shifted as Roman began outlining opportunities. He talked about expanding my practice and leveraging my new reputation, but he didn't talk at me. He didn't offer platitudes or helpful directions. He offered partnership, collaboration, a seat at a table where my skill was the entry fee. You're brilliant, he said quietly. And if you ever doubt it, I'll be the one to remind you. My pulse quickened, not with the old anxiety of being watched, but with the thrill of a real connection. I had spent years trusting the wrong people, but here was a man who saw me without an agenda. His support wasn't a favor, it was a recognition of an equal. The new narrative. Over the next few days, I watched from the sidelines as Tom's professional world collapsed. Articles ran exposing the ethical breaches, and his friends in the DA's office distanced themselves as if his failure were contagious. Jessica quietly resigned, leaving behind only the cold remnants of her ambition. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. I was too busy moving forward. One evening, as the city lights began to twinkle outside my office window, I turned to Roman. Thank you, I said, for believing in me when the rest of the world was trying to break me. He smiled softly, the light from the window catching the sincerity in his expression. I didn't just believe, Ivy. I knew. And I'm glad you finally see it for yourself. For the first time, I allowed myself to feel something beyond professional satisfaction. It was a subtle warmth, a quiet possibility. My life had shifted. The betrayal and the heartbreak were no longer the center of my story. I had reclaimed the narrative. And with Roman by my side, I wasn't just surviving the storm anymore. I was the storm. The morning sunlight streamed through my office windows, painting long, golden streaks across my mahogany desk. I sat behind it, reviewing the final evidence logs for the ethics committee. My mind felt calm, sharper than it had ever been. This final reckoning wasn't just about exposing Tom and Jessica. I realized as I turned the pages that it was about affirming my own power, my own integrity. They had tried to make me a footnote in their climb to the top. Today, I was the one writing the ending. Roman arrived mid-morning, as he usually did now. He had a coffee in his hand and a brief, steady smile that made me feel unexpectedly grounded. Ready for the next move? He asked. I looked up at him and nodded, feeling the weight of the moment, but none of the old fear. More than ready. It's time to finish this. The airtight case. Together, we had prepared a meticulous presentation of Tom's malpractice. We documented every stolen note, every instance of Jessica's assistance, and the resulting breaches that had poisoned the trial. I had anticipated every objection, and Roman's insights had added the finishing touch, making the whole thing bulletproof. Every angle was airtight. Every argument was a razor. When we reached the courtroom that afternoon, the air was already thick with anticipation. I could see other lawyers, reporters, and colleagues filing in. They knew the hopeless trial had been a turning point, but they were about to see the true cost of it. Tom sat at the prosecution table, tense and pasty. Jessica sat near him, but she wouldn't even look in his direction. I didn't feel pity. I felt a cold, professional clarity. The reckoning. I stood before the ethics committee and felt a composed intensity settle over me. My voice didn't waver once. Your Honor, members of the committee, I began, letting my gaze sweep across the room. We are here not to punish for the sake of it, but to protect the integrity of the legal system. The misconduct of the prosecution compromised the fairness of a trial and risked undermining the trust placed in every courtroom in this state. I walked slowly, letting the gravity of my words fill the silence. The evidence shows a deliberate misuse of privileged defense materials and the manipulation of witness statements. The actions taken by Mr. Reeves and Ms. Jessica were not mistakes. They were choices. A murmur rippled through the gallery. I saw seasoned attorneys shifting in their seats, their eyes fixed on me. Tom's fists were clenched so hard his knuckles were white. He tried to speak, but no words came out. He had underestimated me at every turn, and now it was costing him his career. Roman leaned toward me as I sat back down. "You've dismantled them completely," he whispered. I met his eyes, and for a second, the courtroom vanished. I felt a surge of gratitude and a flicker of something much warmer. "It's not over until they admit it," I replied. The release. Witness by witness, I methodically demonstrated the scope of their betrayal. By the end of the session, the room was silent, the evidence undeniable. It wasn't just the committee that was convinced. I could see the shift in everyone present. I was no longer the victim of a stolen strategy. I was the authority. When Roman and I finally stepped out into the crisp evening air, the city skyline was glittering in the fading light. For the first time in months, I felt a literal sense of release wash over me, like a weight had been lifted from my lungs. "You did it," Roman said softly. "They can't touch your credibility now. You've proven everything, without compromise, without fury, just truth." I allowed myself a small, tired smile. It feels different being vindicated this way. Not by attacking them, but by being undeniable. Roman's expression softened, and he stepped a little closer. "You've earned this, Ivy. And not just professionally. Personally, I'm glad I got to see it." In that moment, the noise of the city and the echoes of the stairwell finally faded away. I realized I had reclaimed more than just my career. I had reclaimed myself. Standing there with Roman, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years, the warmth of a partnership built on respect and a connection that hinted at a much brighter future. As night descended over the skyline, I knew the future was mine to command. The storms of betrayal were behind me. A new chapter was beginning. The morning sun cast long shadows across the courthouse steps as I walked in, my briefcase gripped firmly in my hand. There was a quiet confidence in my stride that hadn't been there months ago. All the strategy, the sleepless nights, and the meticulous planning had led me to this, the final reckoning for Tom Reeves and Jessica, and the ultimate vindication for my client, and for myself. The courtroom was packed to the rafters. I could hear the excited whispers of colleagues and the frantic clicking of cameras as reporters adjusted their gear. This saga had already become a legend in the legal community. I scanned the room, my eyes landing on Tom. He looked smaller today, brittle, as though every step he had taken toward betrayal had slowly worn him down from the inside out. Jessica sat behind him, her usual smugness gone, replaced by a heavy, shameful silence. The final argument. I approached the bench with a sense of calm precision that felt like a second skin. "Your Honor," I began, my voice steady and commanding, "we are here to address the ethical violations that have compromised the very integrity of this legal system. Mr. Reeves and Ms. Jessica knowingly relied on privileged defense materials, undermining both the trial process and the trust placed in our profession." Tom's mouth opened, a reflex from his old life. "Objection." I didn't flinch. I didn't even turn to look at him. "This is not an objection. This is fact," I replied. Every word was deliberate. I wasn't giving them any room to evade the truth. The evidence is clear. Emails, notes, and witness testimonies all confirm a pattern of deliberate malpractice. One by one, I displayed the documents on the screen. Each one felt like a nail in the coffin of their deceit. The judge's expression grew stern, and the courtroom fell into a captivated silence. Even the reporters stopped typing. The strength of partnership. Roman was seated beside me, and when I glanced back, he offered a subtle, reassuring nod. His presence was an anchor, steady and unwavering. I felt a surge of gratitude that warmed me to the core. He had started as my professional adversary, but he had become my greatest supporter. He was the first person in a long time who respected my mind without trying to own it. In his presence, I felt the strength of a partnership that required no compromise. Hours passed as I systematically dismantled every argument Tom and Jessica had ever relied on. I let the facts do the heavy lifting, highlighting the misuse of confidential materials and the risks they had forced upon my client. By the time I concluded, the truth was undeniable. Tom's tactics were unethical, Jessica was complicit, and my client had been denied a fair shake until I stepped in. Justice restored. The judge called for deliberation, and as we waited, my client leaned toward me, tears brimming in their eyes. "I can't believe this is actually happening," they whispered. I smiled gently at them. "It's happening because we did it right." When the verdict was finally read, it felt like more than just a win. It was justice restored. Tom and Jessica were handed sanctions and a full professional review. My client was cleared of every lingering shadow of suspicion. The courtroom erupted into a quiet hum of respect and relief. The aftermath. Later, Roman and I stepped outside into the evening breeze. The air carried the scent of a city and the distant hum of traffic, but all I felt was a sense of closure I hadn't known in months. "You are incredible," Roman said softly, stopping me on the steps. "Not just today, but through the whole thing. You never let their betrayal define you." I looked up at him, feeling a stir of something deeper than just professional appreciation. "I didn't do it alone," I admitted. "Having someone who actually respects your mind, it changes everything." Roman's gaze softened, his eyes reflecting a quiet affection. "I've always believed in you, Ivy, and I'll continue to, however you need me." I offered him a real, unguarded smile. For the first time, the storm of doubt and deception was behind me. I had reclaimed my career, my integrity, and my soul. As we walked away from the courthouse steps together, I felt a surge of limitless possibility. The trials of the past were over. My future was bright, shared with someone who valued my brilliance as much as I did.